Welcome to the Judgment Call podcast, a podcast where I bring together some of the most curious minds on the planet. Risk takers, adventurers, travelers, investors, entrepreneurs, and simply mind-bogglers. To find all episodes of this show, simply go to Spotify, iTunes, or YouTube, or go to our website, judgmentcallpodcast.com. If you like this show, please consider leaving a review on iTunes or subscribe to us on YouTube. This episode of the Judgment Call podcast is sponsored by Mighty Travels Premium. Full disclosure, this is my business. What we do at Mighty Travels Premium is to find the airfare deals that you really want. Thousands of subscribers have saved up to 95% in their airfare. Those include $150 round-trip tickets to Hawaii from many cities in the US, or $600 lie-flat tickets in business class from the US to Asia, or $100 business class lie-flat tickets from Africa round-trip all the way to Asia. In case you didn't know, about half the world is open for business again and accepts travelers. Most of those countries are in South America, Africa, and Eastern Europe. To try out Mighty Travels Premium, go to mightytravels.com/MTP, or if that's too many letters for you, simply go to MTP, the number 4, and the letter U.com to sign up for your 30-day free trial.
No. So you're not around traveling?
No, not this time. No more Colombia. They didn't want to let me out of Colombia last time I was there.
They didn't let you out, or you couldn't get in?
No, with all the COVID restrictions, it's usually that you have trouble getting in and they deny you boarding if you don't have all the documentation right. Or worst case, they don't let you through immigration. But they let me in, and but unbeknownst to me in Colombia, they also only spoke Spanish at immigration. They still let you in, but they kind of accept you to take a COVID test. And they want you to take a COVID test if they let you in. And I didn't know that because, they mumbled something in Spanish. My Spanish is decent, but I didn't realize that. And then I went to the airport and everything was good. I was checked in. And then I went to immigration. She's like, "You're not leaving." I'm like, "What do you mean?" And I was already through. Like, shit, they were running after me to the gate. She's like, "Yeah, you're not leaving." I'm like, "What's going on?" And yeah, you didn't take a COVID test. And they just introduced us like a day before I got to Colombia. So I had to circle back and go back to the city and fly a week later. It was a little annoying.
Oh, well. But you have your experiences wherever you go. The funny thing is in Europe, I've been to Tenerife. Coming back yesterday, I was there actually on business. And, crossing borders in Europe, you really don't know what you have to do unless you read the rules, which are changing effectively every day.
Yeah.
And I told myself, listen, I go there. Let's see what happens when I come back. And I was quite nonchalant, to be honest, because I didn't care in this moment. And then people said, well, you have to fill a form, digital form of the German immigration, saying on which aircraft you have been, where you've been sitting, and so on and so forth. And I was told before I was going there that if you're on business in less than 5 days, and I was there only for 3 days, you can come back and you don't have to worry about anything.
Yeah.
I was there and they said, no, that's bullshit. You fly back, you have to go in quarantine for 10 days, and you can exit the quarantine early after doing a PCR test after 5 days. So that was not really very helpful because I actually have a meeting in Düsseldorf on Tuesday. Now I have to shift everything. But anyway, yeah, within Europe, it's really quite messy because every country has different rules, and they try to make you avoid any trip.
Yeah, I think that's become the global pandemic in people's minds, so to speak. The bureaucrats are now telling us what we're allowed to do for every step. And, Canada is the worst offender, so to speak, in Australia. But I was actually looking at going to Germany yesterday, and I had to do A 72-hour-old PCR test just to transit to Portugal, which is fair enough. But then for Germany, it's a 48-hour test, which can be a different kind of test. And then I actually wanted to go to Prague, which requires yet another test. I'm like, whoa, I'm going to be out $400. This is going to be more than the whole flight just for the testing. I'm like, this is really mean.
But that's a stupid question now. But why would you travel with all these restrictions? It's no fun anymore. I'm in the midst of this business, right? But it really pisses me off so much that they especially if you cross a border now they have even closed the border between Bavaria and Czechia. Czech Republic, and so you're not even allowed to cross the border anymore. The same between Bavaria and Tyrol.
Yeah, I saw that. I mean, I think
anymore.
Yeah, Europe and a lot of places are going to end up, like I don't know, like in the 1930s or late 1940s, where you literally couldn't go anywhere anymore. I'm really surprised that Europe is taking that turn. I was in Europe in summer, and things looked so good compared to the US. I'm like, holy shit, they really going to pull it off, and now they're really overdoing it. So I hope it's going to change. Numbers are falling everywhere.
It is going to change. I always think of the good in things and the good in people. Call it naive or what, but in the end of the day, it will also for the industry. The bottom line is going to be it's going to take years, but whatever happens in life and across the world, I think there's always a good perspective, good thing in it, and be it whatever.
It's tough. I mean, this is derailing pretty much everyone in the industry. Some places are doing better than before, I feel. So Cancun, I went down to Cancun, and it was $600 a night. It's pretty much every hotel. It was crowded, and there were a lot of Brazilians. So not a lot of Americans, which used to be the 90% crowd down there. A lot of Brazilians came up to Cancun to celebrate.
But is there any regime, like any COVID regime you have to follow, or is it just do what you want?
Well, there is something in theory. I mean, most countries have a theory. Germany usually is the one country that does take it seriously. But in most countries, there is rules kind of as a virtue signal to pacify the population. But on the ground is minimal. Basically it is, instead of 2 chairs, you have 1 chair on the table. I mean, that's it. And there is kind of a mask mandate. But even most places in the US, I was just in Miami. There is certain masks are worn, but I'd say it's very loosely enforced, and the same is true for most places in the South in the US. And Florida has very low case counts, lower than California, which is a very strong mask mandate. So all these things, they pacify your soul, but I think for the real virus, they don't do much. Seemingly, who knows? I'm not the expert.
Oh yeah, we will see. But bottom line is, I'm still. We will come out of this mess earlier than later, I guess, depending on the vaccination process. And it seems to pick up even in Germany, even though it's really slow. And with all these over organizations and over effectiveness of Germans, they mess up. I don't know why. And
I mean, Germany loves their bureaucracy, right? And there's so many layers, and the bureaucrats don't suffer from any COVID shutdown, right? They get the same salary, and they want to do what's politically right, so they don't care about
what I keep saying. Yeah, they can shut down everything, and the taxpayer is taking the bill. It's crazy, but I guess that after Easter, before what we call Pfingsten, Pentecost, I don't know if you have that in the US. But I guess by then we will have a pretty quick drive up of restart of business, of passengers coming back, and offer going to be implemented again. But we still, it's really low right now, wherever you look at it.
Yeah, I really wanted to pick up our conversation again
Yeah.
from last time because we talked about the amazing feat that you went through during the last couple of months. You actually started an airline. You got an AOC in the middle of one of the biggest crises of the aviation industry. Tell us more how this happened, and maybe you can also help us understand a little more about your background, how you got into the travel industry and aviation in particular, since you've been doing this for quite some time.
Okay, let's start with the second first, perhaps. I'm actually a lawyer by education. I never practiced law as such, but I got into the travel industry through the back door. And I've always been very focused on with my professional involvement with restructuring businesses. And at some point in the early 2000s, I was asked to restructure an IT company, and which was providing software solutions for the airline industry, with revenue accounting and operational software for airlines. And well, I said, okay, I'm going to do it, but I had no clue about software and about airlines. So I had to quick dive in. I had to quickly learn, which I did. And actually it helped because you should know, I guess you know, but airlines today are pretty much IT companies with an airline infrastructure and aircraft and staff and everything, but it's very tech dominated.
One would hope so, right? The technology, we just had Nick Blackmore, who used to run the restructuring team, the IT restructuring team for Cathay Pacific, and he said, well, it was basically a mess of systems from the 70s. No IT business would even touch them, but they have to deal with those.
Yeah, right. Okay, but normally you would assume, and this is how I know it, is that you try to, and the business goes so quickly. Meanwhile, you really have to adapt yourself tech-wise as well. So your systems have to be really up to date, and with all the digitization going on, you have to be even. Let's say you have to try to be avant-garde. You have to be quicker than the others because this is what differentiates you in the end of the day. So this is what I did, and the group which owned the company then saw that it worked out, and I actually went in as a shareholder as well. So because I saw that things were going well, and I wanted to take the upside of it, and then I was asked by the owner of the group if and he was in negotiations, and this group had an airline in its portfolio which was called DBA. It was the German affiliate of British Airways, which the group took over in 2003, I think. And in 2006, he asked me if I would be interested to run the negotiations in the takeover for LTU. LTU in those days was, I think, number 3 in Germany, had a fleet of 26 aircraft, Longhaul, GmbH, were flying intercontinentally Asia and North America and pretty much North Africa and Europe. And well, I said, okay, I'll do it. And so I ran the negotiations with the group which owned it in those days. And then we actually acquired the airline. And then he asked me actually to run the airline, to run the restructuring. And that was actually a jump in cold water because I didn't really run an airline before. I ran companies. But it turned out to be a right decision. And apart from the fact that I had, let's say, an external approach, an external view, I was not really coming out of the industry, which helped me because I thought differently. I thought, let's say, pretty much with a blank sheet of paper coming in and saying, okay, what actually needs to be done? And there was a good team within the airline as well. So we actually managed the restructuring within, was pretty much a year until we got back to at least break even. And so this was actually my entry process in the travel industry. And then I stick to it. I stayed there, and we from then on, we took over a number of let's say troubled and distressed airlines in Europe, and Cityjet, for instance. We took over one in Austria, which unfortunately we actually failed in restructuring, so we had unfortunately also to close it down. It was our Austrian regional carrier. Then we started up a new airline in Germany, and then I at some point after we sold the Irish carrier, actually said Europe is not really our place to be anymore, because competition and the market was not right for us anymore as a standalone entity, and it was. I thought that we really, with everything going on, we thought we couldn't really provide any added value to restructuring, to reorganizing the businesses. So I looked into Asia, because it was clear for me that Asia is actually the growth.
Peter, would be my first question, and we know we're going to get to your new venture in a heartbeat. Restructuring in airline. It sounds to me something miraculous is going on. So when I think of airlines, there's usually some entrepreneurs who, and I think of the case of Wizz Air, because a lot of people remember that it's something that is red hot. Everybody knows it. There's a lot of marketing. We see a lot of interest in that airline. People go to destinations they wouldn't go otherwise, as it happened with Wizz Air. But the biggest problem is obviously making money off an airline. It seems there's Warren Buffett's quote with this. So the airline world is usually littered with well-intended, pretty high-flying startups that make it for 1 to 3 years, and then they, because of the competitive situation in the airline industry, and given there's always an incumbent, always have trouble making money. When you go in restructuring, well, what does that mean? You cut costs, or you change the marketing? Is there like a secret recipe that maybe other airlines could learn from?
First of all, Warren Buffett is right. You really don't make money running an airline. You make money by buying and selling an airline. This is how we made money. We were getting to a situation where we got profitable, and but it's not that you get rich running an airline. It simply doesn't work like that way. But you can live on an airline. You can, let's say, make it successful. You can keep it alive. That's pretty much the focus. And everybody who tells me different today, I wouldn't believe it. Because the landscape is today such, it's so highly competitive that the margins are so small that you cannot simply imagine that you can let's say miraculously make tons of money with running an airline. But answering your question on restructuring, it always depends. You cannot. While I always say that an airline it's not really rocket science. In the end of the day, you have to sell tickets. You have to have your costs under control, and the bottom line has to fit. So when we get approached that there's an airline out there which needs either a new ownership or needs a restructure, we really have let's say a first look at it. There are many airlines out there where I would say there is no reason for them to exist anymore, because the market is so tight that even the best restructuring wouldn't work. So obviously we look at, for instance, we took over Corsair, which is still existing. It's a French long-haul carrier operating out of Paris. So
not about.
To take a practical example, we obviously the French market is highly competitive. It's all out of Paris. It's 2 airports. It's a strong national carrier, so to say, with Air France. They are actually serving everything, and there are a number of long-haul carriers also operating out of Orly and Charles de Gaulle, the 2 airports, and. So, but in any case, we looked at it, and we saw that there was a perspective for an upside. The fleet was highly inhomogeneous. We had Boeing 747s flying. We had A330s, two different types, 200s and 300s flying. And obviously that was not really helping the bottom line. It was highly costly. But then again, on the other side, what brought us to the decision to actually take over the airline was the positioning in Oli. Oli is a highly competitive airport. There are scarce slots. We had a high number of slots, so we had let's say a perspective of really serving routes which would really be interesting. And the markets which were being served were, while being really with lots of capacity on the market, it made there was room for development. So we made our business case ahead of us going in, and we saw pretty clearly that once we would have harmonized the fleet, once we would have developed the network, and we also took the decision to increase our presence in North America. We opened Miami, we wanted to open New York. So this is all, let's say, questionable now with COVID, because the situation is a bit different. And in the meantime, but I come to that, we sold the airline again because it was clear for us that in the context of COVID, there a different perspective was needed. But I can tell you a little bit more to that later on.
Can you give us an idea of the numbers involved? I don't know if you're allowed to talk about that, but how much does an airline cost when you buy it? Is it more like 5 million or 50 million? Just to give us a ballpark.
Let's say theoretically, I cannot talk about a specific airline because I'm obliged on, but our approach, and it's people might say that you need to have balls for that. For us, it's important that the airline is clean when we take it over. It does not have any liabilities anymore, and it needs to have sufficient cash to run the restructuring. So this is our aim, and this, if we pay anything, obviously we pay something for it. It can be a big number, it can be a small number, depends on the circumstances of the airline. But for us, the clean sheet of paper is important, because otherwise you're dealing with the past of the airline. You have to fill holes, which has no interest on us, because we actually want to develop the airline. So much to the numbers. I cannot tell you too much about it, because obviously I'm obliged to keep a kind of
But to give us an idea, I mean, airline sounds like you have to come in with $1 billion. That's how it sounds, right? So, but it's obviously not the case. But just to give us a number, can $50 million buy you an airline in the range of pre-COVID, and hopefully one day post-COVID, in the range of Corsair, who leases, I assume, a bunch of planes? Look, or not? That's
we are talking about airlines which were highly loss-making, or which are highly loss-making. So effectively, these airlines don't have a value. You could argue that there are assets which have a value. For instance, slots, aircraft, if they are owned or on the balance sheet. Sometimes they have it, but you can also assume that while the airline is already in distress, most of the assets have been monetized by previous management or previous owners. So actually, it's not that you take over much. You take over a running operation, you take over a network, and you try to solve a problem for somebody who's owned the airline before. So you can imagine where I'm getting to.
Okay, we're getting to a smaller number.
We are getting to smaller numbers here, and
that's good to hear.
In the end of the day, we are solving a problem for somebody else. We do it on our own account because we own the airline, but
you get the upside.
There's sometimes we also agree on models where the seller gets an earnout when we're successful. So there, the number gets smaller and smaller, as you can imagine. But
yeah, you're kind of running a Hyatt model in the airline business. You know, Hyatt kind of doesn't own most of their hotels, but they manage it. So they tell everyone what to do in terms of what a room should look like, what the staff should do, how it's being presented online and offline, obviously too. But they don't have as much upside in the particular success of the hotel, but they do have a staggered fee. So depending on the success of your hotel, they get more or less in their monthly fee. I guess maybe that's a way to compare it. Obviously, it's not a good comparison, maybe not a full comparison.
No, but we take the risk, and I think this is the important thing. You know, the seller gets away with actually getting away with the airlines having in somebody else's pocket, and we run it, and we run our own airline. We run it to our best capabilities and to our best of knowledge and the expertise, and we have done so quite successfully in the past. So those who are selling it to us know what they get, and that somebody else is solving a problem they couldn't solve, right? Yeah,
you're the doctor of the airline industry. Since you're the doctor, I want to ask you about you know, there's upside and downside. Obviously, cost cutting is one part of that. In terms of upside and selling more tickets, is there like a golden rule you follow? Is there low hanging fruit that some of these carriers haven't really ventured into? Because I always feel, you know, when you want to grow the pie, when you want to grow the airline, this is where most of the effort should go into, right? To find either new channels to sell tickets or expand the channels, or I don't know, go into a price war. That's kind of what WOW Air did with their $69 tickets to Iceland, and they told me when I spoke to them at the time, they told me, you know, we can basically give away the seat for free. We make so much money on ancillary fees. And I'm like, that sounds really shaky, because people might not have to go for those ancillary fees, right? They don't go for luggage. They don't go for food. That seems really shaky, because you attract a certain crowd that's obviously already prepared to not pay much and live through the suffering of WOW Air, so to speak. And obviously it didn't work out for them at the end, but this might not have been the issue. But what do you think is the biggest leverage there in bringing sales up, which seems to be at the heart of the issue?
Yeah, well, it's not only sales, but it's a big part, and it's the part, obviously, because at some point you come to your limits in reducing costs, or having your costs under control is something you have to do anyway. But there's a natural end to cutting costs, right? Yeah. So it's always the upside in selling. But selling, it's not only the from, at least from my point of view, it's not only the channel. It is very dominantly the channel. But first of all, you have to have a product. You have to have a network which is compelling, which is interesting to customers, and where you have at least a kind of, there are no niches anymore today. I hardly see any niches. So you have to be positioned in a way where you're decently and reasonably competing against somebody else. So it is coming down to how do you so what you sell is clear. You sell your tickets. You know what your competitors are charging. You know what it's pretty much open book today. So ultimately, it is about a combination of having, let's say, a competitive product on the same route you serve with your competitors, and using the right channels, and obviously selling through channels, not only your tickets, but I fully agree with the guys from WOW Air. Ancillary revenues make up today around 30% of your this is an aim you should achieve, 30% of your revenues, and if you do it right, you can make a difference. And this is also where we come in as a restructurer. We obviously we look at the network. Is the network right? Is the fleet right for what you're flying? Is the cost structure appropriate to the let's say to the structure of the airline as such? And then again, how is your pricing model? How do you have a multi-cabin, multi-class cabin? How do you leverage on that? How do you sell? Which channels do you use? What is your product consistent of? And so on and so forth. And there's no rocket science to that. I think our big advantage is that we can focus. We see what needs to be done, and we don't have a mass of, let's say, discussions to be taken, because we are a pretty small team doing what we do, and we decide quickly, and then we implement quickly. We don't lose time. We try not to lose time. And I think this is an important factor to what you could call successful in the end of the day.
Well, one thing that I was always curious about, and I was really excited about that, but it seems to be a story that didn't end well, is and you've looked into this with Corsair, I guess, is long-haul discount flying, right? So discounted in the sense of it's a lower ticket price, maybe more fees. And it seems to have taken off, obviously, with Southwest, and then Spirit and Allegiant that are really coming back strong now. And then we have on the other hand, in Europe, we had the EasyJet and Ryanair, and probably a bunch more by now that I don't even know their names. For long haul, Norwegian really tried. And I think they had a spectacular product that was really tuned in. But it seems to be something that, with COVID or without COVID, they struggled way before COVID. It seems to be something that nobody can get right. And I don't know if maybe it's impossible with the current set, how the airline industry works. But since the 80s has been tried, and it almost seems like it works, and then it just blows apart again.
Yeah, I hate to say that, but I think it was 4 or 5 years ago, and I was repeatedly asked this question: does long-haul, low-cost work? And it is my conviction that it cannot work. It simply cannot work because long haul has nothing to do with low cost. What they did is effectively a combination of low fare and reduced product. But ultimately, what you're flying and long haul, the productivity of your aircraft is quite limited when you fly long haul, and you can only make as much money as you can in this moment for a certain flight. You have a certain number of seats in the aircraft, and the aircraft serving the long haul low cost, currently low cost, were pretty new aircraft, because otherwise it wouldn't work anyway. But the problem is these new aircraft are quite expensive as well. And then again, you have a predominated number of cabin staff. You have your pilots. You have everything else. Low-cost carrier pays the same fuel price as the others. In most cases, the same lease rates as the others, who are actually charging more. And so it is. Even though on certain routes it might work, I'm not saying that it principally cannot work, but if you consolidate the whole network, I'm pretty sure it cannot work. And those who are serving it, and also in France, there is an airline serving low cost long haul. It's French B. Yeah, and the management repeatedly tried to convince me that it does work. But you also have to know that there's another airline linked to the same group. It's Air Caribe, and which is not a low-cost airline. So, there's always a trick of let's say, hiding fees, hiding costs within a group, and then you can shift them, or also the aircraft, as you wish. And I think if you really would look at a single operator, and even Norwegian was not really a single low-cost operator on the long-haul side, because they actually did work very well on the medium haul, the European traffic. Yeah. And so a standalone long-haul carrier, honestly, I don't know anyone. Perhaps I missed somebody now, but Asia.
I think one thing, yeah,
but if you do it, let's say standalone, it would not work.
Well, one thing people, I think, got really hopeful about, and I think we're still looking there quite a bit into the future, is that we've seen that the hub and spoke model has lost a little bit of their attractiveness, especially in the eyes of consumers. We see this in the US a lot, way more than in Europe, is that people are really curious about point-to-point connection. I think this is what really helped take off Southwest, because they were literally the only airline flying between those two regional airports. And we have a ton of airports in the US, so it's a little different in Europe and in Asia. We have all these little airports in Southwest. These airports are not congested, and Southwest was the only one flying, and the prices were decent. They weren't super cheap, but they were decent, and nobody else could make it work, and there wouldn't be enough volume for a hub and spoke model. And you see this in Texas, for instance, a lot. If you're still going from Texas to Houston is drama in terms of flying. It's expensive, and it shouldn't be, right? So you just go to a different airport, and then it's Southwest, and then it's $50 and no more drama. And I think what people were curious about is that we also have the point-to-point model more with the new generation of long-haul jets, and I think this is what Norwegian was betting on. We get into smaller airports, and we have this example here in the Bay Area. We have San Francisco, who is the predominant airport for a long time. It was used to very congested, lots of fog issues, and then he went to San Jose and Oakland and said, we can maybe use that as a starting point, have lower costs, lower turnaround time. We have more of an leverage there. But then the problem was, where do we go in Europe? So in Europe, they flew into the same hubs, right? They flew to Oslo, they flew to London, and in Europe, maybe you can go to Orly instead of Paris. But it seems that the number of places you can actually go that attracts the same amount of passengers, they seem more limited. And I think it's more of an airport issue. If we would have this sprouting of airports that accept international traffic, and they are within, say, 6 to 10 hours of flying distance, I think there might be a real shot for another low-cost carrier. But I mean, now with COVID, obviously the trouble is that international borders seem sealed for eternity, judging from current news. And it might take another 10, 15 years until we go back to this super globalization that we had a couple of years ago.
Well, airport is a factor. It's an important factor, but it's not the factor. At least for the cost side of it, I'm just talking about an airline, not as a passenger. For the passenger, it might be quite compelling to pay, let's say, a ticket price of, I don't know, 350 euros, or I don't know what they are from what you pay from the US into Europe. But in the end of the day, I look at out of the perspective of an airline, and the airline still is stuck with first of all, they have to fill the aircraft in a way where it really makes sense for the airline. So they have to fill the seats, and they need to have, and they have been doing a pretty good job in that. A price structure which makes sense, but the question in the end of the day is it sustainable? And this is where I come up with my question. Even with all the ancillary revenues they might come up with, is it really sustainable in the end of the day? And I don't see this happening. And well, I know that Norwegian tried with different staff structures. They had Thai pilots flying out of Ireland. They had made all sorts of, let's say, workarounds in order to make the model happen and successful, that just grows your complexity. You know, you need different AOCs. You need to get everything on the line, and the success. A successful airline is, in the end of the day, an airline which has as little complexity as possible, and it runs against the model of being a low-cost carrier, long haul or also short haul. The more complex you get, you lose your, let's say, advantage point. You lose your cost reduction aim. Because every complexity costs money in the end of the day.
Yeah, I think in eyes of consumers, we expect the airline industry to kind of behave like the semiconductors, like an iPhone, right? It doubles in speed every 18 months, and it should be the same price. And it works beautifully with all the semiconductor devices. But with the airline industry, there's no semiconductors behind it. But in consumers' eyes, it's a similar thing that we expect should get much cheaper, and it has gotten much cheaper. And it should be basically free. That's kind of the new expectation, right? And it should be a Q Suites, Qatar Airlines, business class.
While at the same moment, the costs are going up. Fuel is getting more expensive. Airports are getting regularly more expensive. Then leases are, depending on the aircraft type, more expensive. And then you have staff. Staff expect to earn more over the course of a timeline. And at the same time, as you just rightly said, the prices of tickets get lower. So this is an equation that doesn't work really. In most cases, it doesn't work. So you have to find new means of revenues, and where we come back to the ancillary revenues, and the channels, and how to get yourself into the market. And I think this is the important part. Being successful in the end of the day and this perhaps is also, let's say, points to the question: how can you make money with an airline? That's really the big secret some airlines might have. And to be very honest, we have done well with running an airline, but we were not necessarily making heaps of money. So the question is, why do airlines like Ryanair or also Lufthansa and others make money? It's also very strongly linked to the fleet structure.
I was curious, but before we get there, and I think this is a wonderful point, or maybe we can do both. There's these upstarts that seem to really take over the European low-cost market right now. This is Wizz Air and Blue Air, right? Blue Air comes out of nowhere for me, but they show up everywhere. And then there's Wizz Air, who has
the Romanian Blue Air.
Sorry, what?
Blue Air from Romania, right?
From Romania, yeah. And they seem to really grab every route they can right now, and then market it, because they feel they have the attention span now. I don't know if they really have passengers, but you can schedule things 12 months out, and then you can cancel it again. I don't know what their secret is, but Wizz Air is now expanding to Abu Dhabi, and there seems to be nothing east of, say, Poland that Wizz Air hasn't conquered. From my perspective, I live in San Francisco, but I go to Europe a couple of times a year. How do you explain how they are able to be so aggressive in growth? B, it seems like the pandemic hasn't really done much to them. Maybe I'm wrong. And C, do you think that's sustainable and they're actually making money with this?
Well, actually, the one airline which really impresses me is Wizz Air, because Wizz Air indeed is, I guess, also one of the very few airlines which have successfully positioned themselves in the low-cost market in Europe. And I think there's a pretty simple reason for it, because they are coming out of a region where there was high demand in traffic, but it was not really tapped in. That was Eastern Europe. And they were lucky enough that the competitors in Eastern Europe actually all failed. It was the Hungarian airline, I missed the name, the state carrier.
Was it Maya? Something like that, I feel.
Yeah, something like that. They failed, and so they could actually really tap into a new market for them, where they really could develop. They had a new fleet. It's similar to actually what Ryanair has done a couple of years earlier, but they were strongly focused on Eastern Europe. But then they were also, let's say, with the regional airports really opening also to the low-cost carriers, and the interconnectivity and the Eastern European countries being part of the European Union, Romania, Bulgaria. So there was a need for, let's say, cross-border traffic, which was quite easy because we have free free travel within the European Union, so you just could hop on a plane and fly somewhere else without any visa or any other restrictions. So they really tapped into this market, and now they made themselves a brand, which is quite. I never flew with them, to be honest, but for what I hear, they're really good, and they're reliable. Their on-time performance is pretty good. And they're cheap. They're really cheap. Well, I would say that Ryanair was cheap once, but they cannot afford to be that cheap anymore. And they also tapped into a business segment in order really to grow their story. So they're getting a little bit more like the legacy carriers. They're not so much low cost model anymore. And they're also flying into the major airports now. So this is what Wizz Air is not doing. They are strictly keeping to their original model, and this keeps them to be successful. Well, Ryanair is successful as well. It's no doubt about that. But well, with flying, the world gets pretty small, and with the major carriers really now also with COVID getting into major trouble, this really opens up pretty much a new world for them, which they really can tap into.
Do you think the balance of power that we had it was for a long time that Ryanair moved into certain airports, then there was usually a political debate. It was very strong political debate in Germany about limiting the access of Ryanair to certain hubs, certain number of flights. The same happened with the Middle Eastern airlines. So the idea was to prop up Lufthansa and the legacy carriers and keep their tariff structure, their fare structure in place, more or less. Do you think that will be the same after COVID? Do you think these political restrictions will topple over and anyone can compete who wants to compete?
I think this has changed in the last years anyway. Lufthansa has tried to make their share of political influence, and honestly, ultimately, they still succeed somewhat with the Middle East carriers, trying to get them into the German market, but with the low-cost carriers, all of these being European carriers, anyway, it doesn't really help them that much to keep them away. So now even Ryanair has entered the Frankfurt base, and I guess I don't know what they're doing with Munich, honestly, but it's not about really that these low-cost carriers are hindered to develop their position in the German market or across even in France, where EasyJet is really strong, and it is today a fact that they are there. It's going to be even stronger because these low-cost carriers will exit the crisis far better than the legacy carriers will have, such as Air France, Lufthansa, British Airways. They're really struggling because they have to manage the bottom line in the end of the day, and with all government money being pumped into these airlines, and actually, to my knowledge, Ryanair and Wizz Air have not asked for it. They got support, but not really in terms of equity, but rather loans. So they are far better off, and I think they are also better prepared to again reposition themselves in the market. Obviously, these low-cost carriers have put their fleet to a large extent on hold, and they have put them on the ground. But I guess that they're pretty quickly able to reactivate them, and at some point this will come, and travel will come back. And once, let's say, countries open their borders effectively again and create demand. And I think everybody's waiting for that. So low-cost carriers are going to be better positioned to reactivate and position themselves in market, which were, let's say, pretty much to for instance in Germany, to Lufthansa and Eurowings. And we will surely see, and this also needs to be seen in the context of airlines having failed over the last years in Germany, for instance. We had Air Berlin, we had Germania, we had, what else did we have? I think we had 2 or 3 other airlines which are not there anymore. So there is a need for traffic, and the regional airports here, it's devastating. There is really demand for connectivity, and Lufthansa alone, even with Eurowings, are not going to be able to provide that. And we are not talking about Germany alone. We have that across all countries in Europe. And so we will have to see how this will evolve post-COVID. The hub and spoke, and you have been talking about the hub and spoke before. There is a kind of revival of hub and spoke now again, because it facilitates the legacy carriers actually to operate, and it makes it easier for them. But it's not surely the solution, and it will not be for long, until long, when let's say there is going to be a shift back to the point-to-point connectivity to intercontinental, but also within the continent.
Yeah, I want to get to your new venture and where you see the opportunities in the airline market. I know that the founder, Neeleman, the founder of JetBlue and Azul, he is starting with a fleet of A220s. Those are smaller aircraft. They, as far as I know, are Embraer aircraft, but Airbus has bought them, so the new label has been put onto them.
No, and we're Bombardier.
Bombardier. Oh, my mistake. But I've flown the A320. It's a great aircraft. It feels much more spacious than you would expect than a small aircraft used to feel. I hope they're safe enough. It doesn't go the route of the 737 MAX. But I felt like this is a great aircraft to work with. And I think his strategy, from what we know, the airline is called Breeze, as far as I know, is to go to even smaller airports and then do kind of a Southwest revival, where he goes to really small airports, connects them, brings out a $29 fare, and hopes for the best. That's what we know. That might be completely off, or we speculate about. Where do you think the niche right now, and where is your new carrier positioned, or where would you like to position it?
Coming back to what you were just referring to Breeze, I think from the American US perspective, it really makes sense, because you are the US is pretty much a closed shop within the country, and it's a huge country where you still there's a huge demand of connectivity also to the smaller airports, and so that really makes sense from my perspective. It is, and the aircraft, by the way, is a great aircraft, and it's not only very reliable. They had a couple of issues with the engines, but they were not. It's not a safety issue. It was simply a reliability issue. But this has been solved. So I think the Airbus 220 is something which is absolutely fine, and I think today they are already also have, let's say, a cost base which is highly competitive. The other airline you were referring to is AirK. We invested in this one. I guess you mean this one, right?
Yes, your news baby. Yes. Mm-hmm.
We invested a couple of years ago into a new low-cost carrier startup in South Korea, simply because Northeast Asia was, from my perspective, the only real market where you could assume a development which was what we were looking for, right? They had passenger increases of 10% year on year. So it's really tapping into the Chinese market, and our aim was simply to set up an airline under our standards. We supported the management in the setup and the structuring of the airline, and the aim was to connect a secondary Seoul airport, the capital of South Korea, to secondary destinations in China, Japan, and Taiwan. And I didn't know the market before, to be honest, before we entered into this venture, but I flew down there and talked to the people and looked into what could be expected, and I was really impressed by what the Chinese market is capable of delivering in terms of passengers, in terms of demand. If you think that today just 4% of the Chinese population have a passport, and this from government sources is expected to grow to 12% until 2025, you just can imagine what this will have as an effect on international traffic. So, yeah. and South Korea being the #1 destinations for Chinese people, it was, for me, it was simple to say, okay, let's go there, because what else can you do wrong? And that was the reason why we entered the market. And so they started actually to fly. They started flying last week, but still due to COVID on a very low, let's say, exposure, because we try to keep it as low as possible until COVID is done. Because we want our competitive advantage of having, let's say, a clean financial situation. We don't want to have any debts or whatever, and all the other carriers you can imagine are highly inflicted by financial repercussions from this crisis.
Yeah, I think you're onto something there. And I was in China in 2019 and flew to basically 10 different secondary and tertiary cities. And I was impressed by the sheer volume of flying that was going on. There's this massive airports in Fuzhou with like 200 gates, and there's like a tiny little airport bus, but there's that serves the airport. It's very difficult to get to. I mean, obviously you can take Uber and Didi, but I was impressed by the sheer size of domestic traffic that's going on. I think the trouble that they still have is that the airspace is not open, and you can see this very nicely on flight stats that they all go through very narrow air traffic control corridors. But the amount of traffic was spectacular, and I think wherever you went in Asia in the last couple of years, it was basically all the growth in tourism came from China. And as you say, it's 10, 15, 20%. And I think Jin Air is the household name there, or one of the household names that started with really cheap flights out of Asia, out of China, which I think China is still new to the idea of a low-cost model itself. And I don't know if Jin was the first one. I didn't see too many there when I was there 2 years ago. And clearly it is the driving force in basically just outbound tourism. And what I felt is the greatest challenge is if you can solve getting an AOC in China and fly to China wherever you want. I think it's not that easy. You know more about that. I always felt it's really tricky to market to Chinese consumers. I don't know how you pull that off. I thought it's coming from a non-Chinese world, selling in China is really hard.
Well, honestly, we had to learn a lot about that as well. And to my understanding, it comes first of all, you have great partners in China itself, because really the channels in China are totally different to the ones in Korea already, you know.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
It is a strongly dominated online channel market, but you still have to have let's say agents on the ground as well, which are actually managing the whole process. So you cannot do that from South Korea. You have to have partners which help you doing it, and no matter how big you are, because while, for instance, in Germany, we can let's say address a market in the UK or Spain or France or Italy, this is not possible in South Korea. And obviously, an airline in South Korea is also Jin you were talking about is actually the low-cost affiliate of Korean Air, and
Oh, I know that. Okay.
and so they all strongly compete into this market, but the really interesting thing for us, and it's not that we came to South Korea and knew how everything worked. We know how it works, but we learned a lot because the whole channel system in South Korea is totally different, or in North Asia, I would say, to what we have known in Europe, for instance. The use of WhatsApp, the use of digital communication in terms of sales, how you use it, how you can really start a booking process out of a communication. That's really interesting. It might not be possible in Europe simply because of data protection reasons, but we were really impressed, and honestly, we learned a lot, and we still learn a lot. How you really can tap into customer demand, how you really can motivate people to travel concretely to get them actually to book a ticket, even though they didn't think of booking a ticket. All this is new. We don't know any of that. Perhaps I don't know how it works in North America, but this is very far away to what we know in Europe. And the digitization process of Europe it's actually really picking up really quickly now, because this is where you can start to differentiate yourself from others. But we are a world away from where the North Asian market, the Chinese, the South Korean, the Japanese are, and Taiwanese are. There's a lot for us to learn.
Yeah, I was always so annoyed by the fact that I'm a big fan of WeChat, and I was very happy to use it. And it's being used for pretty as a credit card, literally as a mobile wallet like Apple Pay. But you couldn't add a non-Chinese card to that wallet. I mean, you can, but it doesn't let you tap it. You cannot check out. And they were really trying to phase out cash in many places in China. But I also couldn't use WeChat. I mean, I had it all set up. I had it on my phone, but
it doesn't work outside of China. But it doesn't even if you're in China, it doesn't work for you.
No, but because you can't load money to it, so you can't. It has to be backed by
credit card.
By a credit card that works. And even if you have Discover or Union Pay, they're the same. They're the same network. It doesn't accept non-Chinese debit cards. So it needs to be issued a card that's issued. Maybe that's just a flaw because nobody really stumbled upon it. I don't think it's necessarily intentional. But you have WeChat and everything. You can communicate, but you cannot use it as a payment mechanism. And Visa, MasterCard, Amex are basically unknown. You can only pay in very few places. And so I was stuck to cash and my Discover credit card, which didn't work very well. And I think a similar issue must happen when Chinese consumers travel somewhere else. They only have Union Pay, which is Discover. It is rarely accepted. And then they go through a similar process. So that's one of the last countries. Japan used to have that problem that we couldn't really pay with our credit cards, but that seems to be all solved.
You know why? Why is that? Because friends of mine, they have been to China. They have done a kind of reconnaissance trip, a digital reconnaissance trip to China, and actually they were pretty blunt, saying they don't care. They don't need the Europeans. They don't need the Americans. Actually to sell more, because they are tapping into a population of, what is it now, 1.8 billion.
I mean, they don't have any
Americans or the others. They don't need them. They're not interested.
Yeah, they don't need any inbound tourism for sure. I mean, there's more countries that don't need inbound tourism. But China, it's weird because they're phasing out cash, of which I understand why they do it. But then also the electronic part didn't work. So you're literally stuck to, I'd say, half of options that I could have eaten at, or museums I couldn't enter because I couldn't pay. There was no way for me to pay. And I mean, they're very friendly people on that level, at least. But I felt a little discriminated against. Let's put it this way. So no, I was fine. I was fine. I really like that these secondary cities they're not as overwhelming. I want to stay a little bit in the airline industry, and there's one airline that really impresses me is Qatar Airways. Right, they've been building a great brand. They've been really succeeding in, it seems, where all the other Middle East carriers even had trouble, is building a great product, very competitive. They have a great airport now. They're ready to go. And also during COVID, they haven't really shut down their network as much. Emirates, basically the A380s are out of business. They basically have one in the air now, or two per day. And they haven't restarted their flights. They just restarted LA, I think, a week ago, and they want to restart other US airports. So they really have cut down their network 99%. Qatar doesn't seem to have that. They actually expanded, and they might have reduced some frequencies, but generally they fly to pretty much the same places they did before, maybe just once a week or twice a week, but they're still up and running. And we know they can afford it, right? They don't really have to make money. But do you think Qatar Airways will get to that point where they come out of this crisis? And it seems to me that happens as the premier brand of airline traffic. And do you think they're going to monetize this and actually be profitable on a whatever basis we want to call it for the next couple of years?
Well, to start with, I don't believe that Qatar ever will be profitable. But I don't even think that this is really their aim to be profitable. Obviously, there's an expectation that the airline does not lose too much money, but I think they are tapping into, let's say, the whole economy there is pretty much linked also to Qatar. So for them, I guess it's a macro perspective they need to take. And this is also what the other Emirati airlines are doing, Etihad and Emirates. So, but you're right. They have been quite present. That's true. But obviously, this comes with a cost. And I guess they're the not only the airline leadership, but I guess also the government has the expectation that there is a kind of visibility of this airline to be around, and we should not forget that there is we have the Soccer World Cup coming up in 2 years. Next year, I guess it's 2020. When is it? I forgot when it is actually.
Yeah, we all lost 1 year, right? So we all lost 1 year now memory.
This is coming up, and I think for them it's a marketing positioning. They have a big advantage to the others. They have when it comes to long haul, a pretty homogeneous fleet, where they can, let's say, allocate the aircraft pretty well on their network where they want to fly, and I see this in Europe, where they're flying with the A350 pretty consistently, and well, it does cost money, no doubt. It is kind of marketing for them, and they are willing to take the bill. And they might be in a position where they can, let's say, mitigate the costs and the effects a little bit through cargo, and some aircraft have been really also used to transport predominantly cargo, also in the cabin. And so this might have an effect, but actually, my son has been flying with Qatar recently to Sri Lanka, and the aircraft was literally almost empty. And so they are willing to take the bill effectively to flying completely unprofitable. And if this makes sense for them, they have to answer that. I think under commercial. Let's say, under commercial perspective, doesn't make any sense at all. I think we all agree.
Well, maybe, I'm not so sure, because here's what happened. So basically, the airline world and the marketing in the airline world is completely devoid of any marketing. There's no other brands. There's no confusion right now. So I see banners of Qatar all over LA airport, about San Francisco airport, about what was the other airport I just went to, and it was full of Qatar. The Qatar logo. Was it Miami? I think it was Miami. Anyway, so if the if you can be so counter-cyclical, and obviously Qatar is not hurting for money, it's never had. Otherwise, they wouldn't have started the airline in the first place, right? They didn't expect it to make money in like 2 years. And there is enough money to go around, and they don't have to buy used treasury bonds. They can actually invest it in a real running business they have control over. They never know what the US is going to do with their treasury bills. And so the idea, if you have the monetary firepower to invest so counter-cyclical, where you are the only one who does any marketing, I think the same is going on with Blue Air. Blue Air is doing so much marketing because they know there is no other airline currently around that does any marketing, because it doesn't lead to immediate ticket sales, at least for most of them. And let's assume, and this is a big bet, that the market comes back in 6 months from now. Right? It might not come back for a couple of years, right? We don't know that. But let's assume there is a speculation that the market comes back in July. I feel like Qatar has outcompeted all the other Middle East carriers, at least, and maybe a bunch of European carriers too, because they simply had this staying power, and they're seen as reliable, and their branding image is as high as ever, from my point of view. I feel like Qatar has reached this Olymp kind of by stealth, and it was always behind Etihad for the longest time. And now it's anyone I talk to is in full agreement how beautiful and great Qatar Airways is. And all the other airlines are barely talked about anymore. So I think maybe there's some genius in this nonsense.
If there is some genius, I don't know. It's also always a matter of how much are you willing to invest into something like that. And do you expect a return on your investment or not? But I agree with you. Although I would say the comparison is a little bit unfair, because I truly believe that Emirates and Etihad at least are trying to let's say bring results which are to the standard of what, let's say, international airlines would expect them to be, and perhaps the rulers in these states simply say, listen, there's a point where there's no continuation in a crisis like that, where you simply have to ground some aircraft in order to really mitigate the losses. But I think the rules which we know don't really necessarily apply to Middle East carriers. This has always been like that from the start, and they were strongly supported, and that's fine. You know, if the countries can afford it, I think there is no complaining, and everybody has been complaining in the past, most of all Lufthansa, about unfair competition. I don't really see that at this point, and if you consider the fact that every international airline, at least from the Lufthansa, has been set up by state money. They have been where they are today. They have been privatized some 20 years ago or so. But until then, they were running on taxpayers' money. So what is the big difference to what the Gulf carriers are doing today? So I think there is some hypocrisy in all this discussion. But anyway, coming back to your point, Qatar, I also consider Qatar one of the best airlines in the world from product perspective, but also they are quite innovative. And I really always like that with them, that they really try to take a step further and try to really think how can we improve customer service? How can we, the whole digitization has been actually one of the top priorities of Qatar for many years now. While other, let's say, European carriers, or I guess also in the US, they have still been sleeping. And now everybody woke up, obviously, but Qatar has always been quite ahead of many others. And I think it pays off for them somewhat, but it comes with a cost, obviously.
Yeah, I hope they can make it work. It's certainly that one airline where it doesn't really matter where I go. I just enjoy the experience so much that it really doesn't bother me. the destination is doesn't really bother me that much anymore. And that is different with pretty much any other airline, where I'm really hesitant to go to a place I wouldn't enjoy. But with Qatar, the enjoyment is so high. It's strange, and I think this is now shared in the wider aviation community. If you could have a pick at any airline you wanted, right? So there's I know you only buy them in special cases, and they're kind of restructuring cases, and there's a certain determination. But if you had a pick at any airline you wanted to run because you feel there is potential, it's in a good spot, and you could, with a few screws turned, make it much, much better. What is your top three that you, if you would have your pick, that you could just choose from? And right now they're cheap, right? Airlines are cheap everywhere. You can basically go to the government of Panama and say, why don't you give me a slice of copa?
Well, to start with, I think Middle East carriers are quite interesting. First of all, they have no unions. So you don't have to struggle with staff representatives and what is good and what is bad and what the expectations are. So I think this helps a lot. That would be some experience for me, because I've never seen that, not to deal with pilot unions, cabin crew unions, and name them. I always respected them. I had a good relationship with them, but communication with them was always pretty time intensive. So a Middle East carrier would be interesting. There are markets which I would consider interesting, but let's say the regulations within the country makes it highly problematic, and this actually you have in many countries. For instance, I love India. I'm a big fan of India, and I always thought of getting involved in Indian aviation, but actually every Indian I was talking to told me to keep away, because it would be not only messy, but I would lose my patience within a day, and could be.
Well, India is a special case, right? It has been, it has destroyed a lot of billions of dollars in investments in the airline industry, but it also created a couple of juggernauts. At least Indigo was doing really well, and they actually seemed to be profitable. So I think it took quite some time. There was Kingfisher and SpiceJet, and I think there were a couple that didn't make it. But eventually someone made it. Someone really understood that market and delivered on a promise of making at least some money, let's put it this way.
Well, I don't really know who made it. They are all struggling, and they have been struggling before COVID. They grew incredibly fast, and a pace of growth always comes also with a cost, because many airlines also in Europe, which failed in ultimately, take Air Berlin. It was a great product. They unfortunately wanted to grow too fast, too big, and growing fast. You can do it organically with your own people, with your own fleet, and simply take in your aircraft. But this goes slow. So what you do, you buy an airline, and we profited from that, obviously, because we sold them too. But integrating an airline is always a messy issue, because you have different unions, you have different fleet, you have to integrate the network and everything coming along. So the same, I guess, was in India. They wanted to grow too fast, too big. They did it eventually organically. They took a bunch of new aircraft in, but you can only grow so fast as you can manage the repercussions going along with it. Every network increase is an investment. It's an incredible investment. People don't really realize that, but if you integrate a new destination into your network, you start flying rather empty until it really picks up. And people have a visibility on your let's say growing network. So it usually takes let's say a year and a half, sometimes 2 years, until an investment into a new destination pays off. So and if you do that, you can do that with 1, 2, or 3 aircraft. But if you have 10 or 15 or 20 aircraft coming in within a pretty short time period, you cannot do it. It's simply impossible. Even with the biggest team and but it is creating a huge complexity which you cannot simply control. So this is what is happening in many countries where airlines have been aiming at the front seat and the pole position effectively to within the market. So and this usually doesn't work out. And but you know they get, how you say, they get crazy ideas. They simply want to grow, and it's whatever costs, and that's a huge problem. And coming back to your question, where else would I want to do that? Well, there are regions in the world where I would love to work, but I don't really know if there is an airline needed. Take the Maldives, for instance. Does the Maldives need an airline? I don't think so. Mauritius, there was an airline just at the beginning of COVID, actually being grounded and going out of business. Mauritius, do you need an airline like that? No, you don't, because there's so much capacity in these markets. And Emirates, Etihad, Qatar, the national airlines of the big legacy out of Europe and Asia flying into, you don't need a domestic airline for that. So,
well, I wouldn't be so quick with the Maldives. You know, whenever I go to a place, I usually ask taxi drivers and people in coffee shops. So what is like the coolest job in town, right? So what does everyone want to do? And say in the US, it's you want to have your startup, right? In Silicon Valley, you want to be a startup billionaire. And in Ethiopia is you want to build an apartment tower, right? Because that's everyone has their own apartment tower now. And in Bali, it's like, I want to own a coffee shop because they're printing money pre-COVID. Again, these things have maybe changed. But in the Maldives, the answer is always, I want to run or I want to be a pilot for the domestic airlines. And they're often not real airlines. They're chartered by the hotels. And the ticket prices, what has happened there is that the hotels have reduced their sticker prices because they've gotten more competitive on Expedia. And say it's $300 for a Maldives resort. And then instead of adding on a resort fee, they said, oh, you know what? You can only go to our resort if you come in with a chartered plane. You can't go take a boat. You can't take any other transportation. And by the way, this is $400, $800 per person, including children. And so the prices for these 30-minute flights, you know, beautiful weather, otherwise they don't fly, and it's only during the daytime. They're suddenly, I don't know, if you go on a CPM basis, they're $20 CPM. They're incredible. I mean, you literally have 10 people in the air and you make $8,000. So I don't know if this is a case for an airline, but I always felt like there's something weird going on for the people who go to the resorts. Obviously, over it's kind of baked into the cost. They would pay more for a room rate, more likely, over time. But I always felt it's kind of a charge that's hidden, right? It's kind of a resort fee in the US that's consumer.
And it's a monopoly because what is it?
You go to a different resort, yeah.
Maldivian water. I knew somebody who flew them, and it's great. It's great, but again, you need it's a commodity in this case because you have to go from A to B, and with boats, in most cases, it's too far away, so you need to take a water aircraft. But again, there's only so much competition possible, so there's no point in setting up a new one there. So
I agree. One airline I'm curious what you think of that I always thought is kind of punished by location is Qantas. I always felt it's a wonderful airline, has wonderful staff, great catering, great airports, and what lounges, whatever they control. And they have this kind of this cool spirit. There's some cool spirit to it. Now they've gone very politically correct, so they've shut down flying forever, it seems. But I always felt before they've been just, if they would have been in a better location, say if they would have been in Hong Kong, they would have been, I don't know, the Middle East. That would have been a huge player in global markets. But in given their location for their hubs, they've been pretty tiny.
Yeah, well, look, they have been. I fully agree with you. They were highly successful. It was a great brand, they had a really interesting network, but they really got into trouble when the Gulf carriers started to fly into Australia. And obviously, how you want to compete against a Gulf carrier? It doesn't really work. So what did they do? Instead of fighting, that they joined them. So they went into the agreement with Emirates. And since then, they have been quite successful, but they lost on the way the coolness, their different spirit, the Australian spirit. What was it? I think that's their
the spirit of flying. Yeah,
the spirit. No, Spirit of Australia. That was it.
Oh yeah, you're right.
And so that's what they lost on the way. But I cannot blame them, because if you want to be cool, being cool does cost you something. And for a long period, customers were willing to pay the price to be flying with somebody cool. But that obviously comes to an end at a certain point. And this is where they came to an end. And then they started to struggle. Then they had their union issues. Then other Australian carriers started to fail. Virgin Australia, I think, was one of them. I don't know how what was their name?
I think Jetstar is owned by Qantas, or at least partially owned. Yeah.
Singapore. I think it's a joint venture of Singapore and Australia.
I think it switched. Yeah, Singapore eventually went into Virgin Australia at some point. It moved around a lot there. Yeah.
But you know, the whole context gets pretty complicated, and every complication brings complexity, and this is where you have to deal the cards in a new, you know, but it's true. Qantas was really a great airline, and well, in some way it still is. You know, it sounds as they are not there anymore, but they are trying to survive, and they're trying to keep up, and I think they're still doing pretty much a good job. But you know, I think today's perspective, we're all looking through the glasses of COVID, and there has been a time before COVID, and there's going to be a time after COVID, and I think the cards are going to be dealt anew, and then we will see who has survived and who has done better than the others.
You're a shrewd businessman, and I like how clearly you look at the industry. When we go a little further away and say we're not just looking at airlines and the way of running airlines, where do you think? Maybe it's something that's we only know in an anecdotal way. Where in this airline stack, right? So we have lots of suppliers. We have there's obviously fuel costs, and then there's the airport operations. There's lots of software involved. There's a whole stack of marketing partners that's being used in different countries. Where do you feel, who actually makes the most money in the airline industry? It seems like the airlines do it from time to time, like Alaska, but generally they're just breaking even. But someone must make a lot of money from the airlines. So who is that?
Well, first of all, I always say that the airlines are at the end of the food chain, because they are the really losers, because they don't have any leverage in discussing with anyone. So they have actually to pay the price they're being asked for. So there are a lot making money as on airlines, starting with lessors, starting with the OEMs, with the MROs.
Help us understand what that means.
MROs, maintenance repair organization, is all the technical environment for let's say keeping aircraft flying. Then you have airports, obviously. Airports, unless we are talking about smaller regional airports, airports are the ones who are coming out of the business pretty profitably. And airlines try to negotiate, because apparently airlines still think they have some leverage by saying, okay, I don't need to continue fly to you anymore, but that's not the point, because if I don't fly there anymore, somebody else will. So today the level of competition plays into the cards of the airport. So there's not much you can negotiate with them. unless you have, let's say, predetermined prices, which we partly have in Europe. So there's not so much in negotiation you have open, but still they make good money. And the more international you get, the more intercontinental you get, the more the airports can play the card. Now there are the system providers. You have, but the ones who make obviously most money, I would say, are the aircraft lessors, and there I would say there's no point of discussing about that. They really make it. And
but as a lessor, you take the risk that the lessors buy the aircraft, right? They get it from Boeing or Airbus. And I don't know how their payments look like. They probably don't buy it in cash either. They have some kind of arrangement, partial.
You simply have to assume that they have a different leverage in negotiating with the OEMs, with Airbus or Boeing or Embraer or who else is there. And they don't only buy one aircraft, they buy a chunk of, I don't know, 20, 30, let's say A320s or so. And so that plays into the price of the aircraft they're buying into. But at the end of the day, they lease out at the market rate. And you have to leverage in negotiating, obviously, and now it's going to be easier because there are a lot of aircraft on the ground. So now it's actually the time to eventually start a new business. You might get a lot of things quite cheap relatively to pre-crisis, but then again, there's also the risk of running the business. But the lessors, this is how they make the money, and they have a huge effect on. It has a huge effect on the bottom line for them. So they are
just. Yeah, I'm curious on how much money is actually involved. Maybe you can give us an idea for the single aisle plane type. You know, these are short haul jets up to 5-6 hours, say an A320, Boeing 737, and then maybe for a 787. What is the leasing rate for those? Is it are we talking a few $1,000s? Are we talking tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars? On I think it's a monthly basis.
We're talking hundreds of thousands per month.
Oh, okay, but I think most people don't know that. Yeah, people don't know that.
So you can imagine that the lease rate of an A320 will be around. I hope I'm not saying anything wrong now, but I assume something around 160,000, 180,000 per month.
That's a lot of money. Wow.
The A330s, for instance, we were flying. The prices were negotiated, so I can say them now. They were at the height A330, and we are flying a capacity of 350 seats. Around 600,000 per month.
Wow. Yeah, that's a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. So you have to transport a lot of passengers in order to make that work. And coming back to the question, how does long haul low cost work? So that's a part of the answer already, you know. And that's only one item. There's fuel, there's staff, and all that other, which adds on to quite a number. And so it is well, and the aircraft itself costs a lot of money as well. So this has to be taken into consideration as well. So I can tell you that the list price of a 320 is around somewhere 65, 70,000, 70 million.
That's a lot of money. Yeah.
And but still, if you can assume that an aircraft is being operated around 20 to 25 years on as passenger aircraft, after that eventually as a freighter aircraft, but not for the 320, then let's say the life of such an aircraft is not so short. So there's a lot of time to make money out of it.
What do you think of those electric aircraft? Finally, I think United invested $1 billion, and JetBlue. It comes out of JetBlue Ventures. I forgot the name of it. You probably know it. They just raised. I think they went public, and they just had a pre-IPO investment. Do you think it's finally coming? And do you think we're going to see a lot more in this? I think it's 10 to 15 people. Maybe it's going to go further. Do you think that's maybe going to put the whole aviation industry more on a semiconductor trajectory, so it gets better every 2 years and it costs the same thing?
Electric aircraft, it will not change the industry as such. I think that the bigger factor is going to be synthetic fuels, which have to come if we really want to build on the idea of a sustainable industry. But there are obviously electric models coming up, but I would say on the very short distance segment. Beyond that, I think I simply cannot imagine that the batteries on these aircraft are going to be developed in a way that they are not so heavy that the flight as such would be actually pretty much on transporting a very heavy battery with a couple of passengers. So let's say economically, it wouldn't make much sense unless there is a evolution and development over the next couple of years where we find something else coming into the market. But I don't see this happening right now. I think we have, let's say, reasonable expectation to have, I think, perhaps for trips into 100 or 200 kilometers, that might work on a drone type model or fixed wing drones, but I don't see that for larger aircraft for bigger distances. I don't see this coming.
Yeah, I mean, batteries and the battery density. I mean, in the end, it's about energy density, right? And batteries I think they're a little slower than Moore's law, so they double in capacity every 2.5 years instead of 18 months, which we have for semiconductors. So you can already see that the day is coming, right? But it might not be in our lifetime. But yeah, sometimes these things accelerate faster than we forecast. It's not that static. It's just a long-term assumption that we have, and it feels to me. I mean, it's the idea that we put dead dinosaurs and that with something that's highly flammable, and we all sit in this flammable tanker for 18 hours seems pretty crazy to me. I mean, the batteries are flammable too, so maybe that's not a big
look at the 787, the Dreamliners, which started to catch fire.
I know. I know it all seems very crazy, but when I think of it from the outside, I mean, I love flying and I do it all the time, but it seems a pretty crazy idea, and that we basically have this wire of relatively recent technology, but in the end we sit on old dinosaurs. Seems really crazy to me. We should remodel this whole thing, and I think it's going to turn out much better, right? And so the capacity will increase, and we can go finally maybe supersonic again, and we can go bigger planes, smaller planes, and we don't have to. It seems it's very. And I think this is largely a safety problem because of all the issues that we had, is that it seems very static, right? So either you buy a small single aisle plane now, you can only go so far as an airline, but you have to do this for the next 25 years unless you sell all these planes. So it puts a lot of stress on an airline organization instead of, like say you run Uber. This car can go 500 miles or it can go 2 miles. It doesn't make any difference for Uber, right? So that the car is ready for it. And I think that creates a lot of organizational issues and way to run an airline that we wouldn't have if these electric planes would take off. The way I envision them, they might look very different when they actually come around.
But in the end of the day, it's a matter of if the OEMs or Airbus or Boeing or Embraer and the others are able to really deliver on that. And I don't see this really coming because let's say the drive for innovation with these OEMs has not been really to a higher standard, I must say. We are still flying the same. If you look at the 737s, we are still flying the same aircraft which was designed, I don't know, in the 60s, I think.
Yeah, just after the war. Yeah.
And so there's not much. If you look at it, actually the Airbus 380 was the first aircraft which was really designed in a different way, with double decks and able to carry up to, I don't know, 800 passengers. And where did it end? They stopped production. So we are actually back to square one, effectively, because everybody sees that it's all about costs. You have to be efficient, and you have to take into account the competitive environment today, which was not so much an issue when the whole designing process started, because we were not so much in the process of liberalization. So everybody thought you could make money with it, running an airline forever, but this stopped to be the case.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of podcast guests, and I asked them about Peter Thiel's model, which is obviously he's been saying in the 70s we kind of stopped growing. We stopped growing productivity growth, and we stopped applying or making the necessary innovations. The question is, what came first? What was causal? And his famous saying is, we expected flying cars, and all we got was 140 characters on Twitter. So, and he's right to an extent. And the things that haven't been touched by semiconductors, where we have this crazy cycle of wait 18 months and what you just bought will be twice as good for the same price, and that's a massive deflation. I think people underestimate the impact of this, and it has now spread to the internet and the iPhones, and it goes from industry to industry, and software is eating the world. But it hasn't come to the aviation industry yet, because this is where we want really different planes, right? We had supersonic flight in the 70s, all gone. We had big planes, all gone. We're back to, as you said, the technology of basically is all just post-war. And the engines still blow up. We saw this with United, and we still sit on this massive amount of really highly flammable fuel, and we think it's fine. It is fine, but I think it's strange. So I'm always hoping there is this momentum where we can put the aviation industry on the same trajectory. So everything gets so much better in its core, not just because we paint it slightly differently, in its core every 18 months. But it hasn't happened yet, but I'm still very hopeful this is going to happen one way or another. Electric planes are the only thing that I see could deliver this trajectory. I don't see anything else.
No, well, the only thing I really see, and it is already available, but since aviation is a very globalized business, you have to make sure that, let's say, the resources are available effectively everywhere is actually synthetic fuels. And this is the one which is possible. It is already there, but it's also a question: how do you position yourselves against the big oil companies? Because obviously they still don't have so much appetite in supporting that, but they have the whole infrastructure.
What is synthetic fuel? I don't know anything about it.
Synthetic fuels are fuels which are being developed synthetically. We don't have any carbon burn, so effectively it's zero carbon exposure, and there are fuels which are being developed synthetically, being produced synthetically. So it's not really oil. It's synthetic fuel, which I don't know what it consists of, honestly, but it does not have any carbon emissions. And this is what it's about. And you can produce them actually pretty cheaply. You simply have to have the infrastructure and the availability in all the airports internationally. And this is the big challenge, because you have to also have the production areas around the world, and effectively, you have, in order to be successful, I think you really have to integrate the fuel, the oil companies as well, because they should have an interest in shifting the focus, because at some point we will come to our limits with oil. And with all the discussions going on right now with reducing our carbon emissions, I think the faster we would be able to implement it, the better. It's possible already. It's available. It simply has to be distributed and promoted by the industry, by governments, by by passengers, and there needs to be some push on it, and a stronger push on it, obviously.
I think that's all the questions I had. Thanks so much for sharing your knowledge, Peter. Thanks
pleasure.
for taking the time. That was awesome.
Great. Been a pleasure.
I hope we get to do this again, and I hope your new venture takes off, literally.
I hope so too. I guess it will, and we will see it fly.
I'm looking forward to it. I want to try it out next time I actually can make it back to South Korea. It's not that easy right now.
Okay. I wish you all the best.
Peter, talk soon.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for doing this. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.